The chains cut into Alira's wrists as two guards shoved her forward, and the crowd's laughter hit her before her feet even touched the wooden platform. She stumbled, caught herself, and looked up into hundreds of eyes that saw her as nothing more than a number on a list. The auction hall of Vayrith smelled of smoke and perfume, a strange mixture that made her stomach turn. Wolf shifters filled every row of seats, dressed in furs and silk, their eyes glowing faintly gold in the torchlight. Alira was the only human being sold that night, and everyone in the room seemed to know it. She had been sold by her own family 3 days earlier, handed over to pay a debt she never created. Her father had looked away when the guards took her. Her mother had not even come to say goodbye. Alira told herself she would not cry. Not here, not in front of strangers who wanted to see her break. A tall man with slicked back hair and a smug grin stepped onto the stage beside the auctioneer. His name was Cade, the beta of the Alpha King's pack, and he wore his authority like a crown he had not earned. He looked Alira up and down, taking in her thin frame, her torn dress, the dirt on her cheeks, and he laughed. It was not a quiet laugh. It echoed through the hall, sharp and cruel, and several nobles joined in, amused by his mockery. Cade turned to the crowd and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Look at this one," he said, gesturing at Alira like she was an object on display. "Skin and bones, what use could she possibly have? Perhaps as a servant who cannot even lift a bucket." More laughter rippled through the hall. Alira's face burned with humiliation, but she forced herself to stand straight. She would not give them the satisfaction of watching her collapse. Then, from the back of the room, silence began to spread. It moved forward like a wave, row by row, until the entire hall had gone quiet. Alira did not understand at first why the laughter had stopped so suddenly. She followed the direction of hundreds of turning heads and saw him. Draven, the Alpha King, had risen from his seat. He was not seated at the front like the other nobles. He always sat at the back, watching, saying little, letting his presence alone command respect. Now he stood, tall and still, his dark eyes fixed directly on Alira. He said nothing. He did not need to. Cade's smug expression faltered. He glanced at his king, confused, unsure why the room had gone silent over a human girl he had just mocked. Draven did not look at Cade. He did not look away from Alira, not even once. The auctioneer, sensing the shift in the room, cleared his throat and resumed the bidding, his voice shaking slightly. Nobles who had been prepared to bid low amounts for a servant now hesitated, watching their king instead of the stage. Draven raised one hand. He did not shout a number. He simply lifted 2 fingers, a signal the auctioneer clearly understood, because the man's eyes widened and he nodded quickly. "Sold," the auctioneer said, his voice barely above a whisper, "to the Alpha King." Gasps spread through the hall. Alira stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. She had expected to be purchased by a merchant needing cheap labor, or worse, by someone looking for entertainment. She had never imagined the most powerful man in the kingdom would claim her without a single word of explanation. Cade's smile disappeared entirely. He stepped back from the stage, his jaw tight, his eyes darting between Alira and his king. Something had happened that he did not understand, and the confusion on his face was almost as clear as the anger simmering beneath it. Guards approached the stage to unchain Alira, their movements gentler than she expected. One of them, an older man with kind eyes, offered her a cloak to cover her torn dress. She took it without a word, still trying to steady her breathing. Draven walked toward the stage and the crowd parted for him without needing to be told. He moved like someone who had never once doubted his place in the world, yet there was no cruelty in his stride, no arrogance in the way he approached her. He stopped a few feet away and studied her face carefully, as though searching for something only he could see. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly. The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that in days. She shook her head, though her wrists still stung from the chains. He nodded once, then turned to his guards. "Take her to the carriage, see that she has food and warmth." He did not touch her. He did not order her forward like property. He simply turned and walked away, leaving Alira standing there, confused by the strange gentleness of a man everyone feared. Cade watched the exchange from the edge of the stage, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable now that his mockery had failed to land the way he intended. He caught Alira's eye for a brief moment, and something cold passed between them, though neither spoke. As the guards led her toward the carriage waiting outside, Alira glanced back at the auction hall one last time. The nobles were already whispering among themselves, speculating about why their king had done something no one had ever seen him do before. She heard fragments of their conversation. Words like human and strange, and never happened before, but none of it made sense to her. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp, a welcome relief after the suffocating heat of the auction hall. The carriage was larger than anything Alira had ever ridden in, lined with soft furs and warm blankets. She hesitated before climbing inside, unsure if this was a kindness or simply a different kind of trap. One of the guards noticed her hesitation and spoke gently. "The king does not harm those under his protection," he said. "You have nothing to fear tonight." She did not fully believe him, but she was too exhausted to argue. She climbed into the carriage, wrapping the cloak tighter around her shoulders as the wheels began to turn. The journey to the castle took nearly an hour, winding through dark forests and quiet villages that seemed to hold their breath as the royal carriage passed. Alira watched the shadows outside the window, her mind racing with questions she could not answer. Why had the Alpha King bought her? Why had he asked if she was hurt? Why had the entire room fallen silent the moment he stood? She thought of Cade's laughter, the way it had echoed through the hall, and how quickly it had died the moment Draven rose to his feet. She did not understand the politics of wolf shifters, but she understood power when she saw it, and Draven carried more of it than anyone she had ever encountered. When the carriage finally slowed, Alira looked out to see a castle rising against the night sky, its towers dark and imposing, lit only by scattered torches along the walls. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress built to withstand centuries of war. The guards helped her down from the carriage, and she stood at the base of the castle steps, suddenly aware of how small she felt beneath its shadow. She had been sold like livestock only hours earlier, and now she stood at the entrance to the most powerful kingdom in the region, uncertain of what came next. Draven's carriage had traveled separately, and he was already waiting near the entrance when she arrived, speaking quietly with one of his advisors. He turned when he heard her approach, and once again his eyes studied her carefully, though his expression remained unreadable. "You will be given a room," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Food will be brought to you. No one will disturb you tonight." Alira nodded, still too overwhelmed to speak. She followed a young servant girl through the castle halls, past tapestries depicting battles she did not recognize, past guards who watched her with curious eyes but said nothing. The room she was given was simple, but far more comfortable than anything she had known in years. A soft bed sat near a window overlooking the dark forest, and a fire had already been lit in the small hearth, filling the space with warmth. The servant girl, whose name was Nora, helped her change into a clean dress and offered her a bowl of warm soup. "You're lucky," Nora whispered as she worked. "The king has never bought anyone from the auction before. Not once. Everyone is talking about it." Alira looked at her, confused. "Why would he buy me? I have nothing to offer him." Nora hesitated, glancing toward the door as though worried someone might overhear. "I don't know," she admitted. "But whatever the reason, it must be important. The king does nothing without purpose." That night, as Alira lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring up at the stone ceiling above her, she thought about the silence that had filled the auction hall, the way Cade's laughter had died so suddenly, and the strange calm in Draven's eyes when he asked if she was hurt. She did not know what waited for her in this castle, but for the first time in days, she did not feel like she was standing on the edge of disaster. She felt, instead, like she had stepped into the beginning of something much larger than herself, something she did not yet understand. Outside her window, the forest stretched into darkness, and somewhere within the castle walls, Draven stood alone on a balcony, staring out at the same trees, his mind turning over thoughts he had not spoken aloud to anyone. He had felt something the moment she stepped onto that stage, something buried so deep in his instincts that he barely trusted it himself. He said nothing of it to his advisors. He said nothing of it to Cade, who would surely question his judgment. He simply stood in the cold night air, watching the stars, waiting for the moment when he would understand exactly what had drawn him to a frightened human girl no one else in that auction hall had thought worth a second glance. For now, the mystery remained his alone to carry, and as the castle settled into silence around them both, two lives that had never been meant to cross had already begun to change course, pulled toward each other by something neither of them could yet name. The morning sun had barely risen over the castle when Alira woke to the sound of soft knocking at her door. She sat up quickly, momentarily forgetting where she was, her heart pounding until the events of the previous night came rushing back. The auction, the silence, the Alpha King rising from his seat without a word. Nora entered carrying a tray of bread, fruit, and warm tea, her expression cheerful despite the early hour. "Good morning," she said, setting the tray down on a small table near the window. "I hope you slept well. The king has requested that you join him for breakfast, if you feel able." Alira's stomach tightened at the mention of Draven. She had expected to be forgotten by morning. perhaps handed off to some servant duty far from his notice. The idea that he wanted to see her again so soon felt strange, almost unsettling. "Does he often invite people to breakfast?" Elira asked carefully, trying to gauge how unusual this request truly was. Nora's smile faltered slightly, and she glanced toward the door before answering in a lower voice. "Never," she admitted. "Not once in the 3 years I have served here. The king eats alone. Always. This is the first time I've heard of him inviting anyone." The words did little to calm Elira's nerves. She dressed in the simple gown Nora provided, gray fabric with soft embroidery along the sleeves. Nothing extravagant, but clearly finer than anything she had worn in years. When she looked at her reflection in the small mirror, she barely recognized herself, though the fear in her eyes remained the same as it had been on the auction stage. Nora led her through a maze of stone corridors, past windows that overlooked vast gardens still glistening with morning dew. Servants bowed their heads as they passed, though several of them glanced at Elira with open curiosity, whispering quietly once they believed she was out of earshot. The breakfast room was smaller than she expected, a private chamber with a single long table set near a window. Draven sat at the head of the table, dressed simply in dark clothing without the ceremonial furs he had worn the previous night. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "Please, sit," he said finally, gesturing to the chair across from him. Elira sat carefully, her hands folding in her lap as she tried to steady her breathing. A servant placed a plate before her, filled with food far richer than anything she had eaten in months. Yet she barely noticed the meal, too focused on the man across the table. "You must have questions," Draven said after a long silence. Elira hesitated before speaking, unsure how much honesty was safe. "Why did you buy me?" she asked finally. "I have no skills that would be useful to a king. I cannot fight. I cannot cook well. I know nothing of your world." Draven studied her for a long moment before answering. "I am not entirely certain myself," he admitted, his voice quiet but honest. "There was something about you in that hall, something I could not ignore." His answer only deepened her confusion, but something in his tone told her he was not lying. He was not the type of man who spoke carelessly, she realized. Every word seemed measured, chosen with purpose. "Cade seemed to think I was worthless," Elira said, the memory of his laughter still sharp in her mind. A flicker of something crossed Draven's face, gone as quickly as it appeared. "Cade speaks before he thinks," he said simply. "It is a flaw I have tolerated for too long." They ate in relative quiet after that, though the silence did not feel as uncomfortable as Elira expected. Draven asked her small questions about her life before the auction, careful not to press too deeply into painful memories. She answered honestly, describing her family's debts, her father's decision to sell her, the years of hardship that had led her to that stage. Draven listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable, though something in his eyes softened slightly as she spoke. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment before speaking again. "You will not be treated as property here," he said firmly. "You may consider yourself a guest of this castle, not a servant, not a possession. If anyone treats you otherwise, you are to inform me directly." Elira blinked, startled by the weight of his words. "Why would you offer me that kind of protection?" she asked. "You don't know me." "No," Draven agreed. "But I intend to." The simplicity of his answer left her speechless. She did not know how to respond to kindness after months of cruelty, and she found herself staring at her plate, unsure what to say next. After breakfast, Draven excused himself for matters of court business, leaving Elira in Nora's care once again. The young servant girl seemed eager to show her around the castle, guiding her through libraries filled with ancient books, gardens blooming with flowers she had never seen before, and quiet courtyards where the sound of birdsong filled the air. As they walked, Nora spoke more openly about the pack's history, explaining that wolf shifters believed deeply in fate and mates, a bond said to be marked by scent from the moment two souls were meant to find each other. Elira listened with polite interest, though the concept felt foreign and strange to someone who had grown up entirely human. "Do you believe in that?" Elira asked. "The idea that two people are simply meant to be together?" Nora shrugged, though her eyes carried a thoughtful expression. "I've seen it happen," she said. "It's rare, but when it does, nothing in this world can shake it. Not distance, not danger, not even death." Elira said nothing, though the words lingered in her mind long after their conversation ended. Later that afternoon, as she sat alone in the garden reading one of the books Nora had lent her, she heard footsteps approaching along the stone path. She looked up to see Cade standing a short distance away, his expression cold, arms crossed over his chest. "Enjoying your new life?" he asked, his voice carrying the same sharpness it had held in the auction hall. Elira closed the book slowly. refusing to let his tone unsettle her. "I'm simply reading," she said calmly. Cade stepped closer, studying her with narrowed eyes. "You should know something," he said. "The king has never done anything like this before. Never brought a human into this castle, let alone treated one as a guest. Whatever you think this is, it will not last." "Is that a threat?" Illyra asked, surprising herself with the steadiness of her own voice. Cade's jaw tightened. "It's a warning," he said. "Do not mistake his kindness for weakness, and do not assume you belong here simply because he chose to buy you. You are still an outsider. You will always be an outsider." Before Illyra could respond, another voice cut through the garden, calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "Cade." Both of them turned to see Draven standing at the edge of the path, his expression carefully controlled, though something dangerous simmered beneath the surface. Cade's confidence wavered slightly under his king's gaze. "I was simply speaking with our guest," Cade said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier edge. "I heard what you said," Draven replied evenly. "You will apologize." Cade's eyes widened slightly, clearly not expecting such a direct command. He glanced at Illyra, then back at Draven, and though his pride flared visibly, he did not dare defy his king openly. "My apologies," he said stiffly, though the words carried little sincerity. Draven did not press further, though his gaze lingered on Cade a moment longer, a silent warning passing between them. Cade turned and walked away without another word, leaving tension hanging heavily in the garden air. Once he was gone, Draven approached Illyra, his expression softening slightly. "I apologize for his behavior," he said. "It will not happen again." Illyra studied him carefully, trying to understand the man standing before her. He carried immense power, enough to silence an entire auction hall with a single motion. Yet he spoke to her with a gentleness she had not expected from someone in his position. "Why do you protect me?" she asked quietly. "I still don't understand what I am to you." Draven's expression grew thoughtful, his eyes searching hers as though weighing how much truth to share. "There are things I do not yet fully understand myself," he admitted. "But I promise you this, whatever is happening between us, I will not let anyone harm you because of it." His words settled over her like a quiet vow, one she did not yet understand but somehow believed completely. As the afternoon sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the garden in soft golden light, Illyra realized that whatever strange fate had brought her to this castle, it was only just beginning to reveal itself. Days passed in the castle, and Illyra slowly began adjusting to a life unlike anything she had known before. She was given her own quarters near the eastern tower, a room with tall windows overlooking the training grounds where warriors practiced each morning. Nora visited often, bringing news of the castle and teaching her small customs of pack life that Illyra had never needed to know as a human. Despite the comfort of her new surroundings, whispers followed her wherever she went. Servants exchanged glances when she passed, and nobles who visited the castle for meetings with the king often stared at her with open curiosity, unsure what to make of a human girl living freely within the Alpha King's walls. Draven remained mostly occupied with matters of the kingdom, meetings that stretched long into the evening, disputes between neighboring packs that required his attention, decisions that shaped the lives of thousands. Yet despite his responsibilities, he made a point of seeing Illyra each day, even if only for a few quiet moments shared over breakfast or a brief walk through the gardens before nightfall. It was during one such evening walk that Illyra first noticed something strange about the way Draven behaved around her. He kept a careful distance, never allowing himself to stand too close, and his eyes often lingered on her longer than seemed necessary before he would quickly look away, as though catching himself doing something forbidden. "Is something wrong?" she asked one evening as they walked along a quiet path lined with tall hedges. Draven hesitated before answering. "No," he said finally. "I simply find myself distracted more often than I should be." Illyra did not fully understand what he meant, but she noticed the way his jaw tightened slightly, as though he were holding back words he did not yet wish to share. That night, alone in his study, Draven sat before a dying fire, staring into the flames as thoughts churned restlessly in his mind. He had sensed something the moment Illyra stepped onto that auction stage, something buried deep beneath years of pain and fear, so faint that even his heightened senses had barely caught it. But over the past several days, spending time near her, the sensation had grown stronger, undeniable now in a way that left him both certain and deeply troubled. Illyra carried the scent of a true mate. It was rare among his kind, spoken of more as legend than reality, a bond said to mark two souls destined for one another from birth. Most wolves carried faint traces of this scent their entire lives, without ever finding the one meant to complete it. Draven had never expected to feel it himself, and certainly never imagined it would belong to a human girl sold at auction like discarded property. He understood immediately why her scent had been so difficult to detect at first. Years of suffering, fear, and suppression had buried it deep beneath layers of trauma, masking what should have been an unmistakable signal to any wolf near her. It was only now, as she began to heal in the safety of his protection, that her true scent had begun to surface. He knew what this meant among his people. A true mate bond was sacred, unbreakable, recognized by every pack as a union no one dared interfere with. Yet Alira knew nothing of this. She did not understand wolf customs deeply enough to recognize what was happening, and Draven found himself hesitant to reveal something so significant before she was ready to hear it. He worried what such knowledge might do to a girl who had already suffered so much loss and betrayal. Would she see it as another form of ownership, another decision made for her without her consent, or would she resent him for concealing something so important? He decided, for now, to remain silent, protecting her from a truth that carried both promise and danger in equal measure. Meanwhile, Cade's resentment toward Alira only continued to grow. Though he no longer dared mock her openly after Draven's warning, his contempt simmered beneath a thin veneer of forced civility. He watched her interactions with the king carefully, noting every glance, every moment of unspoken tension between them, and grew increasingly suspicious that something more significant than simple kindness was occurring. One afternoon, while Alira sat in the library reading quietly, Cade entered unannounced, closing the door behind him with deliberate slowness. Alira looked up, immediately wary of his presence. "You've charmed him well," Cade said, his tone dripping with disdain. "A human girl, living freely in the Alpha King's castle. Do you understand how unusual that is? How dangerous?" "I've done nothing but survive," Alira replied evenly, refusing to let his hostility unsettle her. "If the king chooses to show me kindness, that is his decision, not mine to control." Cade's eyes narrowed. "Wolves do not simply show kindness without reason," he said. "There is something you're not telling me. Something he's not telling anyone." Alira's heart quickened slightly, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. She did not fully understand the strange behavior Draven had displayed recently, but she was not about to reveal any uncertainty to someone clearly looking for a reason to discredit her. "Perhaps you should ask him directly," she said calmly, "instead of interrogating me." Cade's jaw tightened at her composed response. He had expected fear, perhaps tears, certainly not the quiet defiance she continued to show him, despite every attempt to intimidate her. It only deepened his suspicion that something significant was being hidden from him. "I will discover the truth eventually," he said, before turning and leaving the library without another word. Alira remained seated long after he left, her thoughts spinning. She thought of Draven's strange distance during their walks, the way his eyes lingered on her before quickly looking away, the careful control he seemed to exercise whenever they were near each other. Something was happening, something neither of them had spoken aloud, and she found herself desperately curious to understand what it might be. That evening, as she walked alone through the castle gardens, she found Draven standing near the fountain, staring up at the night sky, seemingly lost in thought. She approached quietly, unsure whether to disturb him, but he turned before she could decide, his eyes finding hers instantly. "You seem troubled," she observed, stepping closer despite Cade's earlier warning still echoing faintly in her mind. Draven studied her for a long moment before answering. "There are things I am still trying to understand," he admitted. "Things that concern us both, though I am not yet ready to speak of them." "Does it involve me?" Alira asked directly, tired of the careful evasions surrounding whatever secret he seemed to be guarding. Draven's expression softened slightly, though he did not immediately answer. "Yes," he admitted finally, "but I ask for your patience a little longer. When the time is right, I promise you will know everything." Alira studied his face carefully, searching for any sign of deception, but found none. Whatever he was hiding, she sensed it came not from malice but from genuine concern for her well-being. "I trust you," she said quietly, surprising herself with how easily the words came, despite everything she had suffered before arriving at this castle. Draven's eyes softened at her words, something warm flickering behind his usually controlled expression. "That means more to me than you realize," he said softly. They stood together beside the fountain for a long while, saying little, yet somehow understanding each other more deeply than words could express. Alira did not know what secret Draven carried, but she felt certain, standing there beneath the quiet night sky, that whatever it was, it would change everything between them once revealed. Unbeknownst to either of them, Cade watched from a distant balcony, his suspicion hardening into something far more dangerous. Whatever bond was forming between his king and the human girl, He intended to uncover its truth, no matter the cost it might bring upon them all. The following weeks brought a strange rhythm to castle life, one that Alira found herself slowly settling into despite the uncertainty still surrounding her future. She began helping in the castle's healing chambers, discovering an unexpected talent for tending wounds and preparing remedies, skills she had learned out of necessity during her difficult years before the auction. The pack's healer, an elderly woman named Ivy, took a liking to Alira almost immediately, impressed by her steady hands and calm demeanor even when treating serious injuries. "You have a gift," Ivy told her one afternoon as they worked together preparing herbs for a wounded warrior. "Most humans faint at the sight of blood. You barely flinch." "I've seen worse than blood," Alira admitted quietly, though she did not elaborate further. Ivy studied her thoughtfully but did not press for details. Instead, she continued teaching Alira the properties of various herbs, the proper techniques for cleaning wounds, and the delicate balance required to treat shifters, whose bodies healed differently than human ones. Word of Alira's growing skill spread through the castle, and slowly, the whispers surrounding her began to shift in tone. Where once servants had regarded her with suspicious curiosity, many now greeted her warmly, grateful for the care she provided to injured warriors and sick children alike. Even some of the pack's more skeptical members began to soften toward her presence, impressed by her quiet strength and genuine compassion. Cade, however, remained as hostile as ever, his contempt for Alira only deepening as her standing within the castle improved. He watched with growing frustration as warriors who had once dismissed her now spoke of her kindly, as servants who had gossiped cruelly now defended her against outside criticism. One evening, during a gathering of the pack's senior warriors, Cade could no longer contain his resentment. As Alira passed through the hall carrying supplies to the healing chambers, he stepped directly into her path, blocking her way. "You think earning their favor changes anything?" he said, his voice low but sharp enough for nearby warriors to hear. "You are still nothing more than a charity case our king foolishly purchased. A human playing at belonging in a world she will never truly understand." Alira met his gaze steadily, refusing to let his words shake the confidence she had slowly begun rebuilding. "I never asked for anyone's favor," she said calmly. "I simply try to help where I can. If that troubles you, perhaps the problem lies with you, not me." Several warriors nearby exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly surprised by her composed response. Cade's face flushed with anger at being challenged so openly, especially in front of others whose respect he desperately wished to maintain. "You forget your place," he snapped. "I know my place," Alira replied evenly. "Do you know yours?" The hall fell silent at her bold question, several warriors watching with barely concealed amusement as Cade struggled to formulate a response. Before he could speak further, however, a familiar presence entered the hall, and the tension shifted instantly. Draven stood at the entrance, his expression unreadable, though his eyes carried an unmistakable warning as they settled on Cade. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying an edge that silenced any remaining chatter in the hall. Cade straightened immediately, his earlier bravado evaporating under his king's scrutiny. "No, my king," he said stiffly, "simply a misunderstanding." Draven's gaze lingered on him a moment longer before shifting to Alira, softening slightly as their eyes met. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I'm fine," Alira assured him, though gratitude flickered briefly in her expression at his obvious concern. Draven nodded, though his attention returned to Cade with renewed sharpness. "Walk with me," he said, his tone leaving no room for refusal. Cade followed his king out of the hall, his shoulders tense with barely restrained frustration. Once they were alone in a private corridor, Draven turned to face him directly, his expression carrying more anger than Cade had seen from him in a long time. "This ends now," Draven said firmly. "Your hostility toward her has gone on long enough." "She is human," Cade argued, his voice tight with frustration. "She does not belong among us, no matter how skilled she becomes at treating wounds. I don't understand why you continue protecting her so fiercely." Draven studied his old friend for a long moment, weighing how much truth to reveal. Finally he spoke, his voice quiet but resolute. "She is my mate, Cade." The words hung heavily in the corridor, and Cade's expression shifted from anger to shock, his mouth opening slightly before he managed to find his voice again. "That's impossible," he said. "She's human. True mate bonds don't cross between our kind and theirs." "And yet here we are," Draven replied evenly. "I have sensed it since the moment she stepped onto that stage. Her scent was buried beneath years of suffering, but it has grown clearer every day since she arrived here." Cade stared at him, clearly struggling to reconcile this revelation with everything he had believed about Alira since her arrival. "Does she know?" he asked finally. "No," Draven admitted. "I have not yet told her. I feared how she might react, given everything she has already endured. Cade fell silent, his earlier hostility slowly giving way to something more complicated, a mixture of guilt and disbelief settling over his expression. He thought of every cruel word he had spoken to Alira since her arrival, every moment of mockery and contempt, and for the first time, doubt crept into his previously unshakable certainty. "I did not know," he said quietly. "No," Draven agreed, "but now you do. And I expect your behavior toward her to change immediately." Cade nodded slowly, though his mind remained clouded with the weight of this new information. He left the corridor in silence, walking through the castle halls with none of his usual arrogance, his thoughts consumed by the revelation he had just received. Meanwhile, unaware of the conversation that had just taken place, Alira finished her work in the healing chambers and made her way back toward her quarters, her thoughts still lingering on the strange tension that had filled the hall earlier that evening. She could not shake the feeling that something significant had shifted, though she could not identify exactly what. As she passed through a quiet corridor near the eastern tower, she noticed Draven standing near a window, staring out at the darkening sky, his expression troubled in a way she had not seen before. She approached slowly, unsure whether to interrupt his thoughts. "Is everything all right?" she asked softly. Draven turned to face her, and for a long moment, he simply studied her features, as though seeing her clearly for the first time. Something in his gaze had shifted since their last conversation, deeper and more intense than before, though he still seemed hesitant to voice whatever thoughts occupied his mind. "There is something I need to tell you," he said finally, "though I am still uncertain how to explain it properly." Alira's heart quickened slightly at the seriousness in his tone. "You can tell me anything," she said quietly. Draven hesitated, clearly weighing his words carefully. "Not tonight," he said finally, though his eyes lingered on her with an intensity that suggested the truth he carried was significant indeed. "But soon, I promise you. Soon you will understand everything." Alira nodded, though curiosity and a strange, unexplainable anticipation stirred within her. Whatever secret Draven continued to guard, she sensed it was drawing closer to the surface, and she found herself both anxious and eager to finally understand the truth behind the strange connection that had grown steadily between them since the night of the auction. News of unrest along the kingdom's northern border reached the castle just as autumn began settling over the land, turning the leaves in the royal gardens to shades of deep red and gold. Messengers arrived breathless, reporting that the Thornback Pack, longtime rivals of Draven's territory, had begun making aggressive movements near the shared border, testing the boundaries of an uneasy peace that had held for nearly a decade. Draven called an emergency council meeting that evening, gathering his most trusted advisors, including Cade, whose behavior toward Alira had noticeably softened in the days since their private conversation, though he remained distant and quiet whenever she was near. "They've heard rumors," one advisor reported grimly, "that our king has taken a human into his castle, treating her with unusual favor. Bastion, the Thornback Alpha, believes this makes us vulnerable. He sees it as a sign of weakness he can exploit." Draven's expression darkened at the mention of Bastion's name, a wolf known throughout the region for his ruthless ambition and hunger for territorial expansion. "Let him believe what he wishes," Draven said firmly. "It changes nothing about my ability to defend what is mine." "With respect, my king," another advisor added carefully, "if Bastion learns the full truth about the girl's significance to you, he may see her as a direct target, a way to strike at you personally, rather than through open warfare." The room fell silent at the implication, and Draven's jaw tightened visibly. He had feared exactly this possibility since first realizing what Alira meant to him, knowing that revealing a true mate bond publicly would paint an unmistakable target on her back for any enemy seeking to weaken him. "Increase the guard around the castle immediately," Draven ordered. "No one enters or leaves without thorough inspection, and Alira is not to venture beyond the castle walls until this threat has passed." The advisors nodded, quickly dispersing to carry out his instructions, though Cade lingered behind after the others had left the room. Draven glanced at him, waiting for whatever he intended to say. "I should have realized sooner," Cade said quietly. "How much danger surrounds her now that the bond is forming. I have not made things easier for her since her arrival." Draven studied his old friend carefully. "No," he agreed. "You haven't. But there is still time to correct that." Cade nodded solemnly, a new resolve settling over his features. "I intend to," he said, "starting now." That evening, Alira sat quietly in her room, unaware of the growing tension building beyond the castle walls. She had noticed increased activity among the guards throughout the day, more warriors patrolling the corridors than usual, but no one had explained the reason for such heightened security. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts, and she opened it to find Cade standing outside. his expression uncharacteristically humble. She tensed slightly, bracing herself for another confrontation, but his demeanor carried none of the hostility she had grown accustomed to. "May I speak with you?" he asked quietly. Surprised, Elira stepped aside, allowing him to enter. He remained standing near the door, clearly uncomfortable, though he forced himself to meet her gaze directly. "I owe you an apology," he said finally, "for everything I have said and done since your arrival here. I judged you unfairly, and I allowed my own prejudices to cloud my treatment of you." Elira studied him carefully, unsure how to respond to such an unexpected shift in his attitude. "What's changed?" she asked directly. Cade hesitated, clearly torn about how much to reveal. "There are things happening that you may not yet fully understand," he said carefully. "Things that will become clear soon. But regardless of what those truths reveal, I should have treated you with basic respect from the beginning. That failure was mine alone." Before Elira could question him further, a loud commotion erupted somewhere within the castle, distant shouts echoing through the stone corridors, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps and clashing metal. Cade's expression shifted instantly, his earlier humility replaced by sharp alertness. "Stay here," he ordered, moving quickly toward the door. "What's happening?" Elira asked, fear creeping into her voice as the sounds of chaos grew louder. "The Thornbacks," Cade said grimly. "They've breached the outer walls." He rushed from the room without further explanation, leaving Elira alone, her heart pounding as the sounds of battle grew closer. She moved to her window, watching as warriors rushed across the courtyard below, torches flickering wildly as chaos consumed the once peaceful castle grounds. Unable to simply wait helplessly while danger unfolded around her, Elira grabbed a cloak and moved cautiously toward the door, determined to reach the healing chambers where she knew she could be of use treating any wounded warriors brought in from the fighting. The corridors were chaotic, servants rushing in every direction, warriors shouting orders as they moved toward the castle's outer defenses. Elira pressed herself against the wall as a group of armed guards rushed past, her heart racing with fear she refused to let paralyze her. She finally reached the healing chambers, where Ivy was already preparing supplies for the wounded, certain to arrive soon. "Good. You're here," Ivy said briskly, handing her a stack of clean cloth. "We'll need every steady hand tonight." Within minutes, the first wounded warriors began arriving, their injuries severe, blood staining their torn clothing as they were carried into the chamber. Elira worked quickly alongside Ivy, cleaning wounds, applying pressure, and preparing remedies with a calm efficiency that surprised even herself given the chaos surrounding them. Outside, the battle raged fiercely across the castle grounds. Draven fought at the front lines, his warriors rallying around him as they pushed back against the Thornback invaders who had breached the outer defenses. Bastion himself had led the assault, confident that catching Draven's forces by surprise would grant him the advantage he needed. As the fighting intensified, word spread quickly among the Thornback warriors that the Alpha King's human companion was somewhere within the castle walls, and several broke away from the main battle, determined to locate her as leverage against Draven. Sensing the shift in the battle's momentum, Draven's instincts screamed with sudden urgency, an overwhelming need to reach Elira pulsing through him with an intensity he had never before experienced. He fought his way through the chaos with renewed ferocity, cutting down enemies who stood between him and the castle's interior. Inside the healing chambers, Elira continued working steadily, despite the growing sounds of chaos drawing closer. Suddenly, the door burst open, and 3 Thornback warriors entered, their eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. "There," one of them growled. "The human, take her." Ivy moved to shield Elira instinctively, but the warriors easily pushed the elderly healer aside, advancing toward Elira with clear intent. Fear surged through her, but beneath that fear, something else stirred, a strange warmth building deep within her chest, growing stronger with every passing second as danger closed in. As the first warrior reached for her, something inside Elira shifted violently, an overwhelming sensation flooding through her body, and suddenly, her scent, long suppressed by years of suffering, burst forth with undeniable clarity, filling the room with an unmistakable signal that stopped every wolf present in their tracks. The Thornback warriors froze, their eyes widening in shock and recognition. "She's a true mate," one whispered, horror creeping into his voice as he realized exactly what they had stumbled into. At that exact moment, Draven burst through the chamber doors, his eyes wild with fury as he took in the scene before him. The moment he caught Elira's newly unveiled scent, something primal ignited within him, an overwhelming surge of protective instinct that eclipsed everything else in his mind. "Leave her," he snarled, his voice carrying a dangerous edge that promised violence if his order was not immediately obeyed. The Thornback warriors, already shaken by the revelation of Alira's true nature, retreated quickly, recognizing the danger of provoking an Alpha King defending his true mate. Draven moved swiftly to Alira's side, his eyes searching her face with desperate concern. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with barely restrained emotion. "I'm fine," Alira whispered, though her body trembled from the intensity of everything that had just occurred. Draven pulled her gently against him, his relief palpable as he held her close, the chaos of battle still raging somewhere beyond the chamber walls, though in that moment, nothing else seemed to matter beyond the woman trembling safely within his arms. Outside the room, word spread rapidly through the remaining warriors, both Thornback and Pack alike, that the human girl was no ordinary captive, but the true mate of the Alpha King himself, a revelation that would change everything about the battle still unfolding beyond the castle walls. The revelation of Alira's true nature spread through the castle like wildfire, reaching every corner before the battle outside had even fully ended. Draven's warriors, energized by the discovery that their king had found his true mate, fought with renewed determination, pushing the Thornback invaders back through the breached walls with fierce resolve. Bastion himself, upon hearing the news relayed by his retreating warriors, made the calculated decision to withdraw his remaining forces, rather than risk further losses against an enemy now fighting with the full fury of a mate bond driving them forward. By midnight, the castle grounds had fallen silent once again, the invaders repelled entirely, though the cost had been significant on both sides. Draven remained by Alira's side throughout the remainder of that chaotic night, refusing to leave her even as advisors approached seeking his guidance on securing the damaged outer walls. He delegated what he could to his most trusted commanders, unwilling to be far from Alira after the danger she had faced. "You should rest," he told her gently, as they sat together in her quarters, the castle finally settling into an uneasy quiet around them. "I don't think I can," Alira admitted, still shaken by everything that had unfolded. "What happened tonight? What those warriors said about me being your true mate? Is it real?" Draven studied her carefully, recognizing that the moment for full honesty had finally arrived, whether he felt fully prepared for it or not. "Yes," he said quietly, "it's real. I've known since the night of the auction, though I did not fully understand it myself until recently." Alira absorbed this information slowly, memories of Nora's earlier explanation about mate bonds returning to her mind with new clarity. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked, though her tone carried curiosity rather than anger. "I was afraid," Draven admitted, his usual composure slipping slightly as vulnerability crept into his voice. "Afraid of how you might react, given everything you've already suffered. I did not want you to feel as though your choices were being taken from you once again." His honesty moved her deeply, and she reached out, taking his hand gently in hers. "Thank you," she said softly, "for trying to protect me, even when it meant carrying this burden alone." Draven's eyes softened at her words, something shifting between them in that quiet moment, a deeper understanding settling into place that neither of them had fully acknowledged before. "I know this is overwhelming," he said carefully. "You do not have to accept anything you're not ready for. I only ask that you allow yourself time to consider what this bond might mean for both of us." Alira nodded slowly, her mind still processing everything that had happened, yet somewhere beneath the confusion and fear, she recognized a quiet certainty settling into place, one she was not yet ready to name aloud. Meanwhile, news of the night's events reached Cade, who had fought valiantly during the battle, sustaining a minor injury to his shoulder that Ivy quickly treated. As he sat in the healing chambers recovering, he reflected deeply on everything that had transpired since Alira's arrival, the weight of his earlier cruelty settling heavily upon him now that the truth of her significance had been revealed to the entire castle. The following morning, Cade sought out Alira directly, finding her in the castle gardens where she often retreated to gather her thoughts. She looked up as he approached, noting the bandage visible beneath his torn sleeve. "You're injured," she observed, concern evident in her voice despite everything that had passed between them. "It's minor," Cade assured her, though he seemed hesitant, clearly working up the courage to say something more significant. "Alira, I need to properly apologize for everything I've done since your arrival, not simply because of what you are to Draven, but because how I treated you was wrong regardless of that truth." Alira studied him carefully, searching for sincerity in his expression. "Why the change of heart?" she asked directly. "Because last night I watched Thornback warriors nearly take you," Cade said quietly, "and in that moment, I realized how close we came to losing something precious, simply because of my own foolish prejudice. You never deserved the cruelty I showed you." His words carried genuine remorse, and Alira found herself softening slightly toward him despite everything that had happened. Apology accepted, she said finally. But I hope you understand that trust takes time to rebuild. I understand completely, Kate agreed, and I intend to earn it, however long that takes. As the days following the attack passed, the castle slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, though the atmosphere had shifted considerably since the revelation of Alira's true nature. Warriors who had once regarded her with suspicion now treated her with newfound respect, recognizing her significance to their king's happiness and, by extension, the stability of the entire pack. Draven, meanwhile, found himself navigating unfamiliar territory as he balanced his responsibilities as Alpha King with the growing depth of his feelings toward Alira. He had never expected to find a true mate, let alone one who had endured such hardship before their paths crossed, and he found himself determined to ensure she felt valued and respected in ways she had never before experienced. One evening, as they walked together through the castle's private courtyard, Draven turned to her with unusual hesitation in his expression. "There is something I wish to discuss," he said carefully, "regarding what this bond means moving forward." Alira waited patiently, sensing the significance of whatever he intended to share. "Among my people," Draven continued, "a true mate bond is considered sacred, recognized formally through a bonding ceremony that unites two souls permanently. However, I do not wish to rush you into anything you are not fully ready to accept." "What would this bonding ceremony require?" Alira asked curiously. "A public acknowledgement before the pack," Draven explained. "A commitment that cannot be undone, recognized by both wolf law and human tradition alike, should you choose to accept it." Alira considered his words carefully, weighing everything she had experienced since arriving at this castle, the fear and uncertainty that had once defined her existence, slowly transforming into something resembling hope and genuine affection for the man standing before her. "I need time," she admitted honestly. "This is all still very new to me." "Take all the time you need," Draven assured her gently. "I will not pressure you into a decision before you are ready." His patience only deepened her growing trust in him, and as they continued walking together beneath the darkening evening sky, Alira found herself contemplating a future she had never dared imagine for herself, one built not on fear or obligation, but on genuine partnership and mutual respect. Yet even as peace began settling over the castle once again, whispers continued circulating about Bastion's retreat, and advisors warned that the Thornback Alpha would not easily accept defeat, particularly now that the significance of Alira's bond with Draven had been fully revealed. The threat, though momentarily quieted, remained far from truly resolved, and both Draven and Alira understood that greater challenges likely still awaited them in the days ahead. Weeks passed following the attack, and the castle settled into a period of relative calm, though tension regarding the Thornback threat remained an undercurrent beneath the surface of daily life. Draven increased security measures throughout the kingdom, strengthening alliances with neighboring packs while keeping careful watch on Bastion's movements through a network of trusted scouts. Alira, meanwhile, continued her work in the healing chambers, her reputation among the pack growing steadily as warriors and servants alike came to respect her dedication and skill. The suspicion that had once greeted her arrival had transformed almost entirely into genuine admiration, though she still occasionally caught lingering glances from visiting nobles curious about the human girl who had captured their king's true mate bond. Cade, true to his word, worked diligently to rebuild the trust he had damaged through his earlier cruelty. He accompanied Alira occasionally during her walks through the gardens, engaging her in conversation about pack history and customs, gradually becoming something resembling a genuine friend, rather than the antagonist he had once been. "You've changed," Alira observed one afternoon as they walked together near the training grounds, watching warriors practice their combat skills in the distance. "I hope for the better," Cade replied with a slight smile, a far cry from the smug expression he had worn during the auction those many weeks ago. "For the better," Alira confirmed, offering him a genuine smile in return. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a messenger, breathless from running, carrying urgent news that immediately drew Cade's attention. "The king requests your presence in the council chamber," the messenger said, addressing Cade directly. "Reports have arrived regarding Thornback movements near the eastern border." Cade excused himself quickly, leaving Alira alone with a growing sense of unease. The peace they had enjoyed these past weeks suddenly felt fragile, threatened by the persistent shadow of Bastion's ambition. That evening, Draven returned from the council meeting later than usual, his expression heavy with concern as he found Alira waiting in his private study. She rose immediately upon seeing his troubled face. "What's happened?" she asked. "Bastion has been gathering allies," Draven explained grimly. "Smaller packs along the eastern border, promising them territory and resources if they join his cause against us. He intends to launch a larger assault, one significant enough to overwhelm our defenses entirely this time. Fear gripped Alira's heart at his words. When? She asked. We believe within the next fortnight, Draven said. Our scouts continue monitoring his movements, but we must prepare for the possibility of a much larger confrontation than what we faced before. Alira absorbed this information slowly, her mind racing through the implications of what such a battle might mean, not only for the castle and its people, but for Draven himself, who would undoubtedly lead the defense against this looming threat. I want to help, she said firmly. Whatever preparations are needed, I want to be involved. Draven studied her carefully, pride and concern mingling in his expression. Your dedication to healing has already proven invaluable, he said, but I worry about the danger you might face should the castle come under siege again. I refuse to simply hide while others fight to protect what we've built here, Alira insisted. Let me help however I can. Draven's expression softened at her determination, recognizing the same quiet strength that had first drawn his attention during that fateful night at the auction. Very well, he agreed. We will need every skilled hand available should this battle come to pass. Over the following days, the castle transformed into a hub of intense preparation. Warriors sharpened weapons and reinforced armor, while Ivy and Alira worked tirelessly stockpiling medical supplies and training additional servants in basic wound care, anticipating the possibility of significant casualties should Bastion's assault prove as severe as feared. Cade took charge of coordinating defensive strategies alongside Draven, the two of them working closely together as they had in years past, their renewed partnership strengthened by the trials they had recently endured together. The animosity that had once defined Cade's treatment of Alira had transformed entirely into genuine respect, both for her and for the profound bond she shared with their king. As the days passed and reports continued arriving detailing Bastion's growing forces, Draven found himself spending quiet evenings with Alira, cherishing these peaceful moments before the storm he knew was approaching. Their bond continued deepening, built not merely on the mystical pull of fate, but on genuine understanding and mutual respect earned through weeks of honest conversation and shared experience. I've been thinking about what you said, Alira told him one evening as they sat together near the fireplace in his private study, about the bonding ceremony. Draven's attention sharpened immediately, though he remained careful not to appear overly eager. And what have you concluded? He asked gently. I think, Alira said slowly, choosing her words with care, that I am ready to consider it seriously, once this threat with Bastion has passed. I want to face whatever comes next standing beside you, not as someone uncertain of her place, but as someone who has chosen this path willingly. Draven's expression filled with quiet joy at her words, though he restrained himself from any overwhelming display of emotion, understanding the gravity of the decision she was making. That means more to me than I can properly express, he said softly. I promise you, whatever challenges lie ahead, we will face them together. Their quiet moment was interrupted by an urgent knock at the door, and Cade entered swiftly, his expression grim. My king, he said, our scouts report Bastion's forces have begun moving. They will reach our borders within 2 days, far sooner than we anticipated. Draven rose immediately, the peaceful atmosphere of moments before replaced instantly by the weight of impending conflict. He turned to Alira, his expression serious but resolute. Whatever happens, he said, know that everything I do to protect you and everyone within these walls. I know, Alira said, meeting his gaze steadily, despite the fear building within her chest. And I will do everything within my power to help however I can. As Draven left to coordinate final preparations with his commanders, Alira remained alone in the study, staring into the flickering flames of the fireplace, her mind racing through everything that had led her to this moment. From a frightened girl sold at auction, to a woman standing on the threshold of becoming queen, to a kingdom under threat, her journey had transformed her in ways she could never have imagined those many weeks ago. Whatever battle awaited them in the coming days, she understood now that she no longer faced it as a helpless victim of circumstance, but as someone determined to protect the life and love she had unexpectedly found within these castle walls. The following 2 days passed in a blur of frantic preparation, as the castle braced itself for Bastion's approaching forces. Draven worked tirelessly alongside his commanders, coordinating defensive strategies while ensuring every warrior understood their role in the battle ahead. Cade proved himself an invaluable strategist, his knowledge of Thornback tactics from years of border skirmishes providing crucial insight into how best to counter their impending assault. Alira spent these days working alongside Ivy, preparing the healing chambers to handle what could potentially be significant casualties. She trained additional servants in basic first aid, teaching them how to clean wounds properly and apply pressure to stop bleeding, knowledge that could mean the difference between life and death once the fighting began. On the evening before the anticipated battle, Draven called his entire pack together in the Great Hall, addressing them with the calm confidence of a leader who understood the weight of the moment, without allowing fear to consume his resolve. "Tomorrow we face an enemy who believes our kingdom weak," he announced, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "Bastion has gathered allies through false promises and empty threats, believing that unity built on fear cannot withstand loyalty built on genuine respect and trust." He paused, his eyes sweeping across the gathered warriors before settling briefly on Alira, who stood near the back of the hall alongside Ivy and the other healers. "We fight not simply to defend territory," he continued, "but to protect everything we have built here together, every bond of loyalty and love that makes this pack strong." The warriors responded with fierce determination, their collective resolve strengthening at their king's words. As the meeting concluded and warriors dispersed to make final preparations, Alira found herself approached by Nora, who had grown into a genuine friend during her months at the castle. "Are you frightened?" Nora asked quietly as they walked together toward the healing chambers. "Terrified," Alira admitted honestly, "but I refuse to let that fear paralyze me. Too many people are counting on us being prepared." Nora nodded, understanding completely. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said, "I'm grateful to have witnessed how much you've grown since your arrival here. You've become someone truly remarkable." Alira offered her a grateful smile, though her thoughts remained consumed by worry for Draven, who would undoubtedly lead the fighting from the front lines, exposing himself to the greatest danger despite his position as king. That night, Draven found her in the healing chambers, making final preparations for the following day. He watched her silently for a moment before she noticed his presence and turned to face him. "You should rest," he said gently. "Tomorrow will demand everything from all of us." "I could say the same to you," Alira replied, studying the exhaustion evident beneath his composed exterior. Draven approached slowly, reaching out to gently take her hand in his. "I need you to promise me something," he said seriously. "Should the battle turn against us, should our defenses fail, you must retreat immediately to the safe passages beneath the castle. Do not attempt to fight or defend the healing chambers if the enemy breaches this far." "I won't abandon the wounded," Alira said firmly. "Alira," Draven said, his voice carrying quiet urgency, "I cannot fight at my full strength if I am constantly worried for your safety. Please, for my sake, promise me you will prioritize your own survival should things go badly." Recognizing the genuine fear underlying his request, Alira softened slightly, understanding that his concern came from a place of deep love rather than any doubt in her capabilities. "I promise," she said quietly, "but only as a last resort." Draven pulled her gently into his arms, holding her close as though trying to memorize the feeling before whatever chaos the following day might bring. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he murmured against her hair, "know that finding you has been the greatest fortune of my entire life." "And you mine," Alira whispered in return, her arms wrapping around him tightly. They remained embraced for a long moment, drawing strength from each other before the inevitable challenges of the coming dawn. When they finally parted, Draven pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead before departing to oversee the final preparations of his warriors, leaving Alira alone with her thoughts and the quiet determination to see this battle through to its end. Dawn arrived with an ominous stillness, the air heavy with anticipation as scouts confirmed Bastion's forces had reached the outer boundaries of Draven's territory. The castle's defenders took their positions along the walls and courtyards, weapons ready, expressions set with grim determination as they awaited the enemy's arrival. Alira and Ivy prepared the healing chambers one final time, laying out supplies within easy reach, bracing themselves for whatever wounded warriors the coming battle would bring. The tension in the air was palpable, every servant and warrior alike understanding the significance of the conflict about to unfold. When the first horns sounded, signaling Bastion's forces breaching the outer defenses, the castle erupted into organized chaos, warriors rushing to their designated positions while Draven led the charge against the invading forces with fierce determination. The battle that followed proved far more intense than the previous skirmish, Bastion having brought significantly greater numbers, emboldened by promises of victory and territorial expansion. Throughout the fighting, Alira remained in the healing chambers, working tirelessly alongside Ivy, as wounded warriors were carried in with increasing frequency. She pushed aside her own exhaustion and fear, focusing entirely on providing whatever care she could to those suffering from the brutal conflict raging beyond the castle walls. As hours passed and the sounds of battle continued echoing through the corridors, reports trickled in describing the desperate struggle unfolding across the castle grounds. Draven fought with relentless ferocity, driven by the knowledge that failure meant not only losing his kingdom, but potentially losing Illyra to Bastion's ruthless ambitions. Cade fought alongside his king with equal determination, the two of them coordinating their efforts seamlessly as they pushed back against wave after wave of Thornback warriors. Despite Bastion's superior numbers, the defenders' unity and unwavering loyalty to their king and cause began gradually turning the tide of battle in their favor. By late afternoon, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, word finally reached the healing chambers that Bastion's forces were retreating, their assault having failed to breach the castle's inner defenses despite their overwhelming numbers. Relief flooded through Illyra as she processed this news, though her thoughts immediately turned to Draven's safety. She did not have to wait long before he appeared at the entrance to the healing chambers, exhausted and bearing several minor injuries, but alive and victorious. Their eyes met across the chaotic room, and without hesitation, Illyra rushed toward him, embracing him tightly despite the blood and grime covering his armor. "You're alive," she whispered, relief evident in every word. "I promised you we would face this together," Draven replied, holding her close despite his exhaustion. "And together, we have prevailed." As the castle began the long process of recovering from the battle, tending to wounded warriors and beginning repairs to damaged walls, word spread quickly that Bastion himself had been captured during the retreat, his ambitious campaign against Draven's kingdom ending in complete failure. The threat that had loomed over the castle for weeks had finally been resolved, opening the way for peace to settle once again over the land. In the days following the battle's conclusion, the castle slowly began healing from the chaos and destruction of Bastion's failed assault. Warriors who had sustained injuries received careful treatment in the healing chambers, while servants worked diligently repairing damaged sections of the outer walls. Throughout it all, a renewed sense of unity and gratitude permeated the atmosphere, everyone within the castle recognizing how close they had come to catastrophic loss. Bastion, captured during his force's hasty retreat, was brought before Draven in the Great Hall to face judgment for his aggression. The defeated Alpha, stripped of his earlier arrogance, stood silently as Draven addressed the gathered pack, his voice carrying the weight of authority tempered by wisdom. "Your ambition has cost the lives of many warriors on both sides," Draven said, his tone measured despite the obvious anger simmering beneath his composed exterior. "I could demand your life in exchange for the destruction you've caused, but such vengeance would only perpetuate the cycle of violence between our territories." Bastion remained silent, clearly expecting harsh punishment, surprise flickering across his features as Draven continued speaking. "Instead," Draven said, "you will return to your territory stripped of the alliances you built through false promises, and you will formally renounce any future claims against my kingdom. Should you break this agreement, know that mercy will not be extended a second time." Bastion, recognizing the surprising leniency being offered, nodded solemnly, accepting the terms without protest. He was escorted from the castle under guard, his ambitious campaign against Draven's kingdom ending not in bloodshed, but in humbled acceptance of defeat. With the immediate threat resolved, attention within the castle gradually shifted toward healing and rebuilding. Illyra continued her work in the healing chambers, though the urgency of crisis had faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of recovery and gratitude among those she treated. One afternoon, as she finished tending to a young warrior's healing wounds, Cade approached her with a warm smile, a far cry from the cold hostility he had once shown her those many months ago. "You've become someone truly essential to this pack," he said sincerely. "I hope you understand how deeply grateful we all are for your dedication, especially during the battle." "Thank you, Cade," Illyra replied, genuinely touched by his continued transformation. "Your friendship has meant more to me than you probably realize." Their conversation was interrupted by Nora, who arrived breathlessly with exciting news. "The king wishes to see you immediately," she told Illyra. "He seems quite eager, though he wouldn't tell me why." Curious and slightly anxious, Illyra made her way toward Draven's private study, wondering what urgent matter required her immediate presence. She found him standing near the window, gazing out over the castle grounds where repairs continued steadily beneath the afternoon sun. "You wanted to see me?" she asked, stepping into the room. Draven turned, his expression carrying an emotion she had not seen from him before, a vulnerability mixed with quiet hope that immediately captured her attention. "I've been thinking," he said carefully, "about everything we've endured together these past months, the auction, the growing bond between us, the battles we've faced and survived." Illyra waited patiently, sensing the significance of whatever he intended to share. "I understand you asked for time before considering the bonding ceremony," Draven continued, "and I have respected that request fully. But now that peace has returned to our kingdom, I find myself unable to wait any longer to ask you directly. Elira, will you accept the bond between us, not merely as fate has decreed, but as a choice made freely and completely?" Elira felt tears gathering in her eyes as the weight of his question settled over her, memories flooding back of the frightened girl who had once stood upon that auction stage, mocked and dismissed by those who saw her as worthless. She thought of everything she had endured to reach this moment, the pain and uncertainty that had shaped her journey, ultimately leading her to a love she had never dared imagine possible. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion overwhelming her. "I accept, completely and willingly." Draven's expression filled with pure joy at her answer, and he crossed the room quickly, pulling her into an embrace filled with genuine happiness. "You have made me the happiest wolf in this entire kingdom," he murmured against her hair. Word of their engagement spread rapidly through the castle, and preparations for the formal bonding ceremony began almost immediately, the entire pack eager to celebrate the union between their king and the woman who had proven herself worthy of both his heart and their collective respect. In the weeks leading up to the ceremony, Elira found herself embraced fully by the pack community that had once viewed her with such suspicion. Nora helped her prepare for the significant event, while Ivy taught her additional customs specific to formal bonding ceremonies among wolf shifters. Even Cade took an active role in the preparations, his earlier cruelty transformed entirely into genuine loyalty and friendship. On the morning of the ceremony, Elira stood in her chambers, dressed in a gown of deep blue fabric embroidered with silver thread, a stark contrast to the torn dress she had worn that fateful night at the auction. She studied her reflection carefully, hardly recognizing the confident woman staring back at her, so different from the frightened girl who had first arrived at this castle. "You look radiant," Nora said, tears of happiness gathering in her eyes as she helped adjust the final details of Elira's attire. "Thank you for everything," Elira said sincerely. "I could not have survived these past months without your friendship." The great hall had been transformed for the occasion, decorated with flowers and banners, representing both the pack's traditions and subtle nods to Elira's human heritage, a gesture Draven had specifically requested to honor both aspects of her identity. As Elira walked into the hall, every eye turned toward her. The same crowd that had once witnessed her humiliation at the auction now gathered to celebrate her union with their beloved king. Cade stood near the front, his expression carrying genuine pride and happiness as he watched her approach. Draven waited at the front of the hall, his eyes filled with an intensity of love and admiration that left no doubt about the depth of his feelings. As Elira reached him, he took her hands gently in his, and together they faced the gathered pack. "Before this entire kingdom," Draven announced, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall, "I claim Elira not as property, not as conquest, but as my equal, my true mate, and from this day forward, the queen of this kingdom." The pack erupted into cheers, warriors and servants alike celebrating the union they had witnessed slowly forming over the past months. Cade knelt first, his head bowed in genuine respect and loyalty, followed quickly by the rest of the assembled pack, each member acknowledging Elira's new position with sincere reverence. As Elira stood beside Draven, surrounded by warmth and celebration in the very hall where she had once been mocked and dismissed as worthless, she realized how completely her life had transformed since that fateful night at the auction. She had arrived as a frightened girl sold into servitude, believing herself unwanted and insignificant, yet here she stood now, recognized and cherished, not merely as the Alpha King's mate, but as a queen whose strength and compassion had earned the genuine respect of an entire kingdom. Draven turned to her, his eyes reflecting the same deep love and admiration that had first stirred within him that night he rose silently from his seat, refusing to let anyone dismiss the extraordinary woman who would eventually become his queen. As their kingdom celebrated around them, Elira knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges the future might bring, she would face them not as a victim of circumstance, but as a queen standing proudly beside the man who had recognized her worth from the very beginning.